This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. For those that pay close attention to my world, you know that I've been beating this drum of logical fallacies. Straw men, red herrings, loaded questions, ad hominem attacks. It's just such a waste of time, and it's amazing how many intelligent people use these rhetorical devices to argue any point. Oh, I forgot the emotional appeal. It's not about the facts with them. It's not about the logic. They're just manipulative, Machiavellian little people. So don't use logical fallacies to argue, to debate, to discuss. It's a waste of time. And those people out there, the high achievers, or even the low achievers, as someone made the point on my Facebook, even people that are not well known, often have a very strong ethos, a very strong sense of code, and don't behave this way. So by no means do I think it's only the high achievers that understand the use of logical fallacies is bad. A lot of people do. But it's amazing to me, and I've just seen a fantastic number of examples in the last short few weeks of people coming at me with these logical fallacies. And they're so damn aggressive. They're so sure they're right. But they do not argue with facts. They do not argue with logic. I'll give an example. On my Facebook, I pretty much will be friends with just about anybody. If you're a reasonable, normal person, we have something in common, let's connect, sure. I actually saw a guy recently. He was on Facebook asking me why I had blocked certain people on Facebook. This was what he was worried about. He was worried about that I guess I had blocked some of his friends. I have a real simple rule. Come at me with logical fallacies. Do it in a very aggressive way, perhaps an even mean-spirited way. Perhaps just make up stuff. Life is too short. I will block you. I mean, look, Facebook wasn't even here 10 or 15 years ago. You don't put people in your life that are a waste of time. That is a waste of time. That is masochistic. No fun. Not doing it. My guest today is Tim Larkin, American self-defense expert, founder of Target-Focused Training, New York Times bestselling author of Surviving the Unthinkable. And the subject of self-defense, invariably, the subject of violence must come up. And how do we, us mere mortals, that don't want to, don't need to use violence in our daily lives, but in this random, unpredictable, black swan, lottery-like world that we all exist in, violence can show up on our doorstep at any moment. How do you respond? Tim Larkin has some good ideas. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Okay, here's where I want to jump in. And I'm going to kind of lay this preface out, and then we can dive in and work backwards into your world too. I was thinking of the great scene in Indiana Jones that everyone remembers. So Indiana is faced with this knife-wielding swordsman who's going to kind of show off his skills before he attempts to kill Indiana Jones. And so Jones kills him before he can do anything. And so I think everybody gets the point there really quick. And we all laugh, but it's a great example, and we're going to kind of dive into this. It's a great example of kind of your world too. But the serious dovetail to that I want to go into is the Virginia Tech killing, the killings. Right. Because I grew up in that area. My grandfather went to Virginia Tech, And I was doing some homework on it today, and I was thinking to myself, okay, this guy was not like my friend in San Diego who was a Navy SEAL. He killed 32 people. 28 of them he shot in the head. Now, he was not a SEAL, so he's shooting 28 people in the head. Now, I'm not trying to be insensitive. I've got a niece and 2 nephews that will be in a Virginia college within 10 years. If anything, I think the Virginia Tech killings is a useful instruction now in hindsight to say, what can we do better? Now, I'm really curious from your perspective. You're welcome to comment on Indiana, but I would love to dive right into this Virginia Tech killings and let you unfold it how you see it.
First of all, the Indiana Jones, it really does dovetail into it because it's the whole perception that we have of violence. You know, the fact that you were surprised that the shooter was so accurate when he has seemingly, you know, a lot less training than highly trained people. And I think that's the scary part for us. You know, that's what people really can't wrap their heads around is this use, you know, of violence and how it's just so aware, you know, just so available to us. The fragile things that keep society together. You know, when you drive down a road every day, say you drive down a 2-lane highway, you know, the only thing keeping you safe is an agreement with the other driver. And you're both conveying to each other that I'm going to obey that strip of paint in the middle of the road. But at any time, if somebody just decides they don't want to play by those rules anymore, they literally, it's just a head-on collision waiting to happen. And you then quickly realize, you go, oh my God, I have been, you know, trying to think I had this protection with a strip of paint. The scary part about Virginia Tech for us was somebody just came in and nobody knew what to do. You know, our population has no idea how to handle a situation like that. We've had multiple, you know, shootings like this. The opportunity is understanding, you know, what you can and can't do in a situation like that, what's available and what's not available. But the accuracy aspect of things with people, you know, able to watch the video games, play video games, these first-person shooter games, they get wildly accurate. There was a kid that killed 7 people. He had an 8-round revolver, and he had 7 out of 8 hits on it. And he had never shot a gun before. He literally got a hold of a gun for the first time. He'd only been playing first-person shooter games. And his reasoning for wanting to do it was, he goes, I just wanted to see if it would work. You know, he had a lot of other problems and everything, but what boggled everybody's mind was the high accuracy rate on that.
Great point that I had not even thought of at all.
Yeah, and that's kind of where, you know, where we look at it. And so the problem is, you know, my whole you know, focus these days is to tell people, hey, it is okay to study violence. It's okay to look at violence, understand how it works. It's been stigmatized so much by society that the availability of the tool for us to protect ourselves is really limited. And the people that really have the good information are all the predators. What I mean by good information, I mean, if you're facing a situation where somebody is hell-bent on causing you grievous bodily harm and you do not have choice, you're devoid of choice, we often find that in this day and age that most of us have nothing in the toolbox to deal with a situation like that.
Let's go into the example, though, look, I'm not trying to talk bad about anybody or anything like that, but when I think about Virginia Tech, I think about that many people being killed over hours of time frame. Something went wrong in, as you're talking about, not having anything in the toolkit to respond. And as you've talked about, look, it could be a few seconds. I mean, instead of when you first hear gunshots and being surprised at what you're hearing and, oh, what do I do? There's a different state of mind to go into. Talk about, I mean, we can only theorize, but I mean, this probably happens in many shootings. But it seems like that if people faced with these very random lottery type awful situations, if they have an understanding of using violence at the right time, kind of exactly how you're talking about, it seems like you could at least get the odds back to your side some. There's no guarantee, but at least you can have a fight in the fight.
Well, the opportunity in those type of situations, when I say it, everybody's going to nod their head and go, "Oh, of course." The opportunity in those situations has always been the same thing. It's always been during the reload. And the interesting part is, you can see in the Virginia Tech film multiple times where the guy was reloading and literally nobody did anything. That's the time where you have the opportunity to run the person down, to swarm him, to get things done. Where you see it happening, and this is mostly in the U.S. shootings I'm talking about, is something like the Gabriella Gifford shooting in Tucson, the congresswoman that got shot. Now, here's a state. This is interesting to me because I lived in Tucson for a long time. The interesting part for me was Tucson is a concealed carry state. It's a very pro-gun state. I guarantee you many people in that audience were carrying. And yet, when the shooter came out, he shot off, I want to believe, 32 shots and 28 hit. It was during a reload. And what was very interesting about that was it was 3 middle-aged people that had zero training in any sort of a combat sport or a martial art or any sort of, military training. The one man was, I think he was in his late 50s. He said, "I saw him shoot 3 other people. I saw him go down to get another magazine. And I realized I was probably next. So I had nothing to lose. So I just jumped on him." Then another man jumped on top of him. A woman, I think she was early, like 61, 62. She saw them holding him down, and the shooter was holding the full magazine, and she literally ripped the magazine out of his hand, so he had nothing to reload, and that's how he was stopped. So it wasn't anything. It was just 3 people that truly felt they had no options, and they took action. The Israelis realized years ago the reason you see the proliferation now of suicide bombers is because the Israeli population got extremely good at swarming shooters, and that's when the tactics changed to human bombs. So I mean, the horrible answer that nobody wants to hear is you're going to have to go after this person, but there are intelligent ways to understand that, and in order to do that, you have to make sure that when you take action, that you're actually getting a result. The people that did that with the Gabriella Gifford were extremely fortunate that they were able to subdue him without really injuring him. They were almost doing like football tackles on him, and it just happened to work. But that's not something you want to bet on.
Good point, and that's exactly what I was thinking about, because I'm a 46-year-old male. I played sports when I'm young and in good shape now. I'm 6 foot. I'm about 190 pounds. And when I tackled that guy, if I was in that same situation, of course, it's an older guy, and this you're describing an older people doing this, but even if you're older, at that moment that you're tackling him, it shouldn't just be a tackle, because you don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, you need to violently injure this guy and incapacitate this guy, not just hold on to him and grab a leg and hold him down and hope for the best. I mean, there needs to be something extremely violent in response to make sure he's down for the count.
Right, and that's where what we're talking about really is injury to the human body, and where you get great information on injury to the human body, because everybody's worried about the attackers. Always, you have to assume that when I train anybody, we assume a couple, 3 different concepts. 1, the attacker's going to be bigger, faster, and stronger. Number 2, the attacker's going to carry weapons, and number 3, there's probably going to be more than one. Those are just the general assumptions that I want you to have to deal with. Because that's extremely realistic. So therefore, if you have somebody who's bigger, faster, and stronger, you have to learn how to bypass that. The easiest way to get really great information that's objective, not my opinion or anything, is look at sports injury, sports injury, where you have 2 completely engaged, big, fast, strong individuals playing a sport, going at it, and then all of a sudden something goes wrong. Something goes wrong where somebody takes a piece of their body and they put it through an extremely vulnerable area of the other guy's body that's not rated for that type of traffic, and something breaks or something gets injured. And you see the state change right away. You see a guy who was maybe going, 7 or 8 rounds, just really hard in boxing, taking lots and lots of different shots. And then all of a sudden, he gets a good strike to the liver area of the body, lower margin of the rib cage, and gets that blunt trauma in there. And all of a sudden, here's this guy who's been tenacious. He will literally drop to his knees. His eyes go glassy. He can't move his arms because he's been injured. at that point. You'll see in, say, a mixed martial arts contest, you'll see somebody roll up on a guy's ankle and all of a sudden break the guy's ankle. And here's this amazing competitor who all of a sudden is now on the ground with a part of their body that is injured. We've all experienced it. You've experienced the type of injury that I'm talking about. Probably not as devastating as that. But what you're looking for is you're looking to create a situation where you take the brain out of the context. If you stepped on a sharp object or you've touched a hot surface, your body has automatically gone into a spinal reflex reaction, which is what we're talking about, where the trauma is so high, so great, the stimulus is so great that as the nervous system is delivering the message towards the brain, it hits the middle of the spine and it says, hey, this is too great, sends a reverse signal back down, says, move the limb. Protect that area. And the brain isn't informed on what's going on at that point. So the body is involuntarily taking over, basically, the brain. And so we've all experienced those types of injuries. So that's what you want, because that trumps bigger, faster, stronger. And so learning where on the human body those types of areas exist is kind of the way that we reverse engineer. How would we handle a bigger, faster, stronger individual? That's really the first piece that you kind of look at. And you always want good objective information. You don't want to rely on opinion or anything else like that. And we have such great sports injury data that that's a really great place to start.
I think back to being a teenager, and I think about fights, and I wasn't like a big fighter, but I was in a few and that kind of stuff and whatever. But I think growing up, there was always this concept of honor in a fight. Like you just kind of fight honorably and whoever wins, wins. But if you're fighting a sociopath that wants to kill you, it's not about honor. No,
it's not. And this is the big challenge that we have right now. I mean, the place most people default to when they look at how to deal with violence, we kind of romanticize and gamify violence. And the ultimate gamification of violence is in the ultimate fighting championships, which are fantastic. They're combat sports events that are extremely popular. I'm here in Vegas. I love watching it. I'm literally, my training center is across from the #1 training center in mixed martial arts. Every guy comes through here before a fight. It's an incredible place. Great athleticism, and I love it. But what you have to look at is, we were just talking about injury to the human body. So the last time I looked, the UFC has 31 rules. Of the 31 rules, 27 of them involve injury to the human body. They're prohibited. And the reason being is because if you added injury into the mix, then there's no competition. It's just violence. That's not the goal. The goal is not to maim the other person. The goal is not to injure the other person. The goal is to better, your skill set. The unfortunate part about that, though, is it's acceptable to us. In our thought process, as sane, socialized human beings, we think, okay, this is what we're talking about, that whole idea of honor that you're talking about. And that is exploited against us by these alpha predators. And the scary part that people have to wrap their head around is, the best people in the world at doing violence, murdering human beings with their bare hands, have zero training in combat sports and martial arts. Now, the majority of them all reside in our prison systems. And so that's where, when I tell people, I said, the best information comes from the worst parts of society, and that's the challenge. How can I extrapolate useful information out of that and yet put it in a context that makes sense to us to say, okay, here's how I would do, here's when this would make sense. This time I'm facing a situation like that. I'm devoid of choice. I need to know this very direct information on how to get a result to protect myself.
You talk about the worst in society in prisons. And I could think of documentary tapes. There were interviews that were done with a real crazed maniac sociopath, a guy named Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman. And if anyone hasn't watched those documentary tapes, I mean, this is a guy that was a hired hitman for the mob, and he was a complete sociopath. He felt nothing, and he was just a killing machine. To listen to him, though, is to expose yourself to something that maybe you don't want to know about, and maybe you won't have to know about it in your life. But my gosh, for a couple hours to try and study how the really, really bad people think and operate is not a bad little thing to have in your toolkit. And hopefully you'll never need to know how those people think to deal with them. But it sure seems naive to pretend they don't exist.
What's interesting is I'm actually in the middle of doing a book right now, and I'm interviewing a lot of these guys. I'm actually going to the prisons, and I'm interviewing a lot of the top they're called shot callers. They're the guys that run the gangs, and the gangs run the prisons, and the prisons run the streets. It's a very interesting culture to understand. These alpha predators, these groups, they all have kind of a lot of the same things in common. They're extremely small groups. The Mexican mafia basically is about 150 individuals that literally control tens of thousands. The Aryan Brotherhood makes up less than 0.5% of the prison population. Yet, for about the last 20 years, they were the enforcers. They were the most violent, and they were the most feared of all groups. And when you talk to these guys, we would love to think that they're, really these animals and lower grade thinkers. And what you often find is they are on par with Fortune 500 execs, CEO level personnel. When they talk about things in a business structure, and they talk about violence as currency. And you would listen to one. There was one guy, Rene Enriquez. He's done a lot of interviews for law enforcement. When he talks about the Mexican mafia, you would think you're listening to somebody talking about a very successful Fortune 100 company and how they run. Their whole hierarchy is built on really being smart. It's all about distribution. It's all about controlling distribution. The only difference is their currency is violence. Without violent acts and without being able to guarantee violent acts, they fail, and they can't afford to fail. So they look at violence in a very, very tactician way, a very principled manner, and they look at things from a standpoint of results only. They don't care about technique. They don't care about anything other than, does this work? What's interesting is across the board, when you talk to these individuals, learning anatomy and knowing where on the human body to put your effort is absolutely critical. This is what I come back and convey to people. I said, these individuals, the reason I look at this petri dish of asocial violence in the prisons is not to glorify them, not to sit there and say it's great, but imagine, let's look in an area. If we want to understand the tool of violence, let's look at an area where it's absolute currency. Let's look where, if you're unsuccessful using violence, the ramifications are huge. That's exactly how these guys understand it. They understand asocial cues. They understand that when communication ends, that violence is about to happen. They're extremely adept, and there's an awful lot of good information that we can extrapolate out of this and train ourselves in. And it's actually very interesting to watch. It's not something that's highly, disturbing for us. If anything, the more disturbing part is when I introduce these things to my clients, they're shocked at how well spoken these guys are, and they're shocked at how absolutely, just tactician they are about everything, and just how matter of fact they are about things, in that, because they can't afford to be wrong. They can't afford to fail if they take on a contract killing. If the SWAT team gets there before the man's dead, that might screw up their ability to ever get at that person again, or at least delay it for an awful long time. And then their credibility goes down, and then their drug distribution goes down, their power to, starts to wade away. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's a really, really interesting way, rather than thinking they're just being violent to be violent.
In the last 5 minutes, as you've been talking, all I've been thinking about was, wow, what a great description of two of the world's greatest movies, The Godfather Part 1 and Part 2, both built around, without violence, they fail.
Yeah, and that's how we look at it. My whole thing is to take the stigma out of looking at the subject. Because the one thing is your life literally, I surround myself with I have amazing clients. I've been asked to speak at some incredible events, and I've met, just top performers in many, many different fields. But the commonality is, what I find is, especially in this age of technology where we have so many things available to us, and the creativity is just huge. Oftentimes, my client base forgets that we actually do live in a physical world. That reminder comes shockingly sometimes. My client base that actually comes and seeks me out, seeks out my information, is really 70-30. 70% of the people come to me after the fact, after an act of violence has happened to them or a friend or a family member or something. And I can't undo anything like that. And so the reason I love doing interviews like this and reaching out here is because I'm hoping the majority of the people that will hear this reside in the 30% of my client base where nothing's ever happened to them. They haven't experienced any significant violence in their life, and they're actually seeking out information. I'm hoping that by doing so, I can give them a lot of great information that will absolutely minimize, their potentiality to ever have to experience anything like this.
Tim, let me pull back to UFC for a second. Here you are in Vegas. I'm sure you probably know some guys that are successful in the ring, but I saw the quote from you, and you were talking about some of these guys, some of these fighters. I know what to do in the ring, but when the knives come out, I'm not sure what to do. And you know what? I think it is a real practical example, a breakdown example that all of us can imagine being faced with at this moment. Okay, I'm now in a dark area. I'm by myself. Someone has just brought out a knife and they're coming for me. Now, you're the teacher. Give my audience, I'm going to go back in some more philosophy in a second, but give my audience a way to think about that situation, something very practical, faced with a knife. You know that guy's coming for you. Now what?
Your safety actually resides in closing distance. Okay, so it's going to be counterintuitive to hear this. The most important, the most dangerous situation is somebody that has an active brain. If we focus on the tool, you would think the logical thing would be to disarm the knife. And so in order to give you my perspective on this and where I come from, I have this avatar. There's a picture of this individual that I have that I show at my seminars. And I say, this is the guy I think of every time I go out in the mats. In 2004, a police sergeant got a call to pick up a shoplifter at a Walmart. He pulls up to pick up the shoplifter, he's putting her in the back of the car. As he's putting her in the back of the car, he sees a smaller guy. The guy was probably about 5'6", just coming in. And this was a large guy. This guy was a 17-year veteran. He was a defensive tactics instructor, highly respected, former military, 82nd Airborne guy. Very, very competent guy. He sees this guy coming in. He just knew. He just realized, just from the profile and everything, the fact the guy had both his hands in his pockets in his hoodie, he knew something was up. So he gives the guy a verbal. Guy ignores the verbal, keeps coming. He goes, show me your hands. As he shows his hand, the guy pulls out from one of his pockets a knife. And he goes, I have a knife. And he's coming at the officer. Officer realizes the distance is too close. He can't get to his gun in time. So he immediately does what he was trained to do. He goes in, slams the wrist, grabs the wrist where the knife is being held, does a double 90 twist on it. He can feel the ligaments of the wrist start to separate. He can feel that the bones are just about to break as he's slamming him up in the back of the car. As he's doing so, out of the other pocket comes a 5-round revolver, which he empties in the officer and hits him 4 times and drops him on the ground. The Walmart security officer that had been holding the shoplifter jumps into action at that point, to his credit, and he now grabs the gun. He grabs the gun that is now empty, and the individual gives him the empty gun. He then takes his hand that's mangled, still holding the knife, puts it into his good hand, and stabs the officer twice, putting him down. Now, the story ends up good. The officer that was shot 4 times actually survives heroically, is able to, with the help of another person, shoot this individual and kill him. But for me, the interesting point of the story is both times the focus on each of the security officer and the law enforcement officer was on the tool, not the man. They tried to control the tool, and they left that active brain, which is what is the dangerous thing. This individual went into the situation knowing that he was going to give up his wrist, that he was going to allow this officer to, injure him so he could get his gun out. That's how committed he was. And that's why the focus is on shutting down the brain, stepping in, putting an injury on him to the point to where he can't control anything. And so if you're facing something like where you have somebody drawing a knife, the goal is to get in and do something that's going to take the brain out of the equation. strike him to the throat, come in, strike him to the side of the neck has a huge effect. It can cause a concussion or an instant, fainting. By the interruption of the blood flow and the nerve flow. There's many areas and many options depending on your situation, depending on what's available to you, because of course violence is random and profiles are random. That's why the most important thing is that when you're going to get information, that you get sight pictures showing the same targets, but on various different positions of the human body, because I have no idea to know what you're going to be facing. And so I'm going to give you as much good principled information as possible, because principles will save your life. Techniques will get you killed.
Well, you bring up, and of course, we've only got so much time here, so people will need to dig in further, but I think you get people thinking about the right way to approach this, which is not the tool, the brain. And that alone should cause people to say, okay, time for more homework.
Yeah, and that's where I think people are always surprised when they come in, because they think, it's always going to be about the physical. There's so many things that we can do. If you clearly identify for people what you have to deal with and all the things you don't have to deal with. I basically call it antisocial aggression, where somebody hurts your ego, but there's no immediate threat and you can pull back. But, a lot of us choose to participate in things like that, versus the asocial, which is really what you were talking about. You get yourself caught in an alley. There's no escape and somebody's coming at you with a knife. If you don't do anything, you're extremely, you're basically, participating in your own murder. So there's only one thing that's going to work, and that's the tool of violence. Whereas the antisocial aggression, you're able to take yourself out of those situations. You just have to have control of your ego and, really understand what the goal is.
You're constantly talking about which can be avoided and which is unavoidable. You're not just a guy that's saying there's always going to be a fight. But I think one of the great examples that you give, and I would be the first one to admit that as a guy who's done a lot of running and having almost been run over by cars, I know I've occasionally punched the back end of a car, etc. You talk about a story, a tourist in Corsica and an Audi driver. Why don't you relay that story? Because there's a great example of, you actually, he should have avoided something, but he picked a fight and the result was interesting.
Yeah, he was staying in a very nice part of Corsica. He was there for a wedding. A family member was getting married over there. He was not from Corsica. He was from Connecticut, former Beltway lawyer, highly prominent, very well-known individual, and very, successful, used to getting his own way. And I find oftentimes that when Americans travel, especially, where we tend to forget that we're not in our country anymore. And so we get, believe it or not, in America, you actually do get a lot of leeway on how we talk to each other, our aggression. We get away with a lot of social posturing that in other countries it can be extremely bad. This individual walks over. He went to a market that was over there to grab a couple of things to bring back over to his suite. He goes across the street. He, of course, is not crossing at the crosswalk. He goes to take a step in, and an Audi just flies by him and, almost hits him. Well, in Corsica, you don't have the right of way as a pedestrian. But this guy gets incensed. The guy, stops about a half a car up. This guy, instead of just, understanding, okay, I almost got hit, I should be careful, and I'll just walk across the street. No, he decides to go over to the car, and he kicks the car. And this is a very well-dressed, I'm sure the suit, was a $5,000 suit that he had on. This is not, somebody who normally does this, but he just decided, he was going to let this guy know. The individual gets out of the Audi, extremely well-dressed man, gets out of the Audi, looks at him, walks over, says nothing, as this guy is just, spouting, his indignation, the fact that he was almost hit. This guy balls his fist up, smashes him right in the face, literally smashing his teeth and knocking him to the ground. Gets back in his car and starts driving away. 2 police officers walk up. And the guy starts protesting. It happened. The police officers look at him and start berating him, saying it was your fault. You can't do that here. You just need, you need to understand in this country, you don't treat people like that. You don't kick cars, and just walked away. And this guy was absolutely shocked. Now, my whole point in all of that is that was completely avoidable. He didn't have to participate in that. He didn't have to go, nor did he expect the disproportionate result that he got. because he was thinking in terms of being in Connecticut in the circles that he does. He assumed, because of his extremely nice area of Corsica, that everybody kind of played by the same rules. But Corsica's a very straightforward, old school place. He found out in a really very raw physical way why, you just can't do things like that.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. It's kind of a divergent point here, but the overseas aspect I've seen in the last 2 years, being in many places in Asia, I've seen Westerners, so to speak, foreigners, so to speak, act up at various times. And I don't know if it's an arrogance, it's an ego. And I've even seen mouthing off to police officers. And it just strikes me like, what is wrong with you? Why do you think you're entitled? You don't even know the full situation. And so here we are, we're trying to spend our lives avoiding violence. And now you are single-handedly in another country inserting yourself into the probability of violence. It makes no sense.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about this all the time. My instructor base, I have 52 instructors, 10 of them are master instructors. We've been doing this for a long time. We've known each other forever. Highly, highly accomplished guys, that I have. Well, diverse backgrounds and everybody's there. The commonality that we all have is the more experience you get with this stuff, you live an extremely polite life. Very, very, the last thing we want to do is bring anything on, in our lives. And one of my guys said it perfectly. He just said, I just go around treating everybody like they're 6 seconds away from a shooting spree. Meaning, if you're about to have some sort of an exchange with somebody and they're that close to, the breaking point, how would you interact with that person? You would interact very calmly. You would try to give them as much leeway as possible. And it's just a very, it doesn't cost you anything to operate like that. And the benefits are you don't trigger anything in anybody.
I think also there's an element of never knowing who you're dealing with. And I think back to my time in San Diego and my one friend who was a SEAL. He lived downtown. He didn't live near other Navy guys. He was always in jeans and a t-shirt. But the quiet confidence that he carried about himself, and he was obviously an in-shape guy, but there was just something watching how he carried himself and knowing that this individual has been in multiple countries around the world and has been part of his career, part of his job, killing people. But the way that he carried himself in civil society was 100 times more civil than what you would ever see from the vast majority of the population.
And that's what you'll find. You find the guys that have most experience handling things like this are really the ones that, they're never going to be the ones that are looking for it. They're going to disengage as soon as they can. They're going to live a very cordial, polite life. That's what you want. It's funny, that's even known. My wife is a lieutenant here in Vegas. She heads up the gang and narc units out here. And what her guys always tell me, they say, it's the high level gangbangers that have had a lot of experience with the prison system that are actually some of the easiest people to deal with when it comes to law enforcement. They're extremely polite for the most part. They comply right away. They understand how the system works. And even though their lives are very violent in their world, they never seek it. They don't seek it when they don't have to do it. And it's very interesting because it's the same thing like you said. You saw your friend who was a team guy who, highly, competent in his field and also comfortable in that arena. Yet, why bring it to yourself? Why put it out there? It's never worth it.
Yeah, he never even told people what he did. I mean, he was. I only knew like 6 months after I knew him. I mean, he never said a word.
Right.
Yeah. One last thing, Tim. I'm curious. So here we have this nice, calm, comfortable conversation. Of course, it's about a subject that some people might find frightening or they don't want to think about, but clearly there's a lot of logic here. It's a very logical conversation if one breaks this down. And what you write about is very logical. At least to me, it seems extremely logical. Why did the United Kingdom say you're persona non grata? Why were you not allowed in? I need to understand this.
There's a small backstory to it. 6 years prior to that happening, I was on a BBC roundtable and I had an MP and I was doing a training in an area called Slough. It had a lot of knife crime at the time. And they brought me on to, it's a very popular show in London. And they brought me onto the show almost as a crazy American, kill them all, let them, God sort them out type of guy. And I love that. I love when they position me that way, because then I get to actually fully explain what's going on. So when I talked about my approach to things, I had a former head of Scotland Yard there. We had a rabbi. We had another minister of parliament there. We also had a former head of MI6 that was there. And at the end, including the talk show host, everybody agreed with me except the one MP. She had another friend of hers who was also an MP. It's like our Congress people here in the U.S., who was sitting in the green room. They both said, they shook hands when we left, but I could tell she was not happy. She didn't like the fact that I was exposing supposedly knife crime in her neighborhood. Fast forward 6 years, I have a interview after the London riots. The riots happened in August of 2010. I think, 2010 or 11. And they called me up. I wasn't scheduled to go back to London until May of the following year. I was interviewed by all different groups. I was interviewed by the BBC, all the legitimate ones. And then, of course, I had a couple of the tabloids picked up my story as well. I didn't do any direct interviews with the tabloids. The last question I was asked on one of the BBC interviews was, hey, I know you come here a lot, Tim. You have a 10-year history of coming here. Do you have any clients in any of these riot-affected areas? And I did. I had some in Tottenham and Birmingham. And I said, yes, I have had. Have you been invited to come to those areas and, did any of your people have incidents happen? I said, yes. I said, and my whole point was the reason they were inviting me there, they wanted to show me the point to where they recognized asocial violence was happening, and they were able to recognize it prior to anything happening, and they were able to get themselves out of there. And so that's how the interview ends. Everybody reported it legit. The Mirror, which is kind of like a National Enquirer type publication over there, very popular tabloid, has a huge headline in one of the pages that says Larkin to lead riot tour. And basically the whole thing was they were saying that I was basically going to go into each of the riot areas and rabble rouse. So, of course, that MP takes that article from the Mirror. That's the only one she selected. She sends it into a letter to the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary was the MP, the other MP that was sitting in the green room with her. It's one of her very best friends, Theresa May. Sends that, says, you remember this guy. Look at him. He's in a lot of trouble. Look what the Mirror said. You need to ban him. And that's exactly what they did. They sent me, it was a knee-jerk reaction after the riots. They were really, really scared. They did no investigation on me whatsoever. They didn't do anything. But it would be like Hillary Clinton when she was the Secretary of State, telling somebody they couldn't come in, to the room. And so it went viral right away. 75% of the UK polls were all on my side. People were outraged that happened to me. I never was allowed to bring it to trial. They said that I had passed the 90 days. They had said that they sent the thing. I think it was in August they sat there. They said they sent it to me in December of that year, a letter, and they were absolutely assured that I received it. Yet, when I was flying out of Vegas here at the Virgin counter, May of the following year, I'm getting my ticket. I'm getting everything ready to go. I'm going there to speak. I'd just been inducted into the Black Belt Hall of Fame. I was the instructor of the year. I was going as a keynote speaker for a 30,000 person event in Birmingham, England. And I'm at the counter. I could tell they're like stalling me. They're saying, oh, Mr. Larkin, sorry, we just have to get some more information on the ticket. And I thought that was kind of strange. Now, it's packed. It's packed here in Vegas. I mean, all the London flights are always packed. I hear over my right shoulder a Mr. Larkin. And I turn around, and it really looks like a travel poster for London. All this individual needed was a bowler cap. And he was your ultimate London, diplomat-looking guy. And he was in a three-piece suit. And he had a letter. And he said, may I present this letter to you? This is from the Home Secretary, from Theresa May. We have issued a travel ban because of your activities, and you'll no longer be allowed to travel to the UK. And this is not, what did he say? I forget how he said it, but he basically was saying this is not, something that you can challenge. He says that, and as I told you, it was completely crowded all around me. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. It was like people just got out of the way, and they thought for sure I was some sort of a homegrown terrorist or something when I came out. I tried to bring it to court. I did find my lawyers went to bring it in, and what they said was, because the letter was written in December, and I didn't try to take action, quote unquote, until May of that year, because that's when I found out about it. They said, oh, well, you passed the 90-day mark, so you're going to have to wait 5 years before you can challenge this again. I was never able to bring it up on the merits of the case. I would have won handily, and the government just doesn't want to deal with it. So again, it's great sometimes to, have a really great media interview on a round table, but I found that, if some people don't like what you say, they will go to extreme, lengths to make sure they make it difficult for you to come back.
When politics gets involved and politicians want to exert their power, it doesn't make a difference what country you're in. Watch out, because you just don't know what can happen. Hey, I want to leave you with one last point that I think is really interesting from my world. I interviewed a guy named Robert Aumann less than 2 years ago. He is an 80-something-year-old Nobel Prize winner in economics, game theory in particular. And one of the things we got to talking about was the Cold War and, why does Switzerland have fighter planes and guns everywhere? And his whole big point from a game theory perspective was, you have to truly be willing to fight for there possibly not to be a fight. And if you're not at that point where you're truly ready to go, that's when you've really got trouble. But if you can, he's not saying there's a guarantee, but from a game theory perspective, the math behind it, if you can get to the point where you're there and you're ready and you're going to exert the fight, then maybe it can be avoided.
Absolutely. And that's what is so, that's part of the message. By understanding how violence works, and it's a simple process, and understanding that injury is available to everybody. We've all experienced it. I have small children. I was holding my daughter the other day and she just threw her head back and hit me in the nose. I almost dropped her. A smaller person can inflict injury on a larger person. The problem is we always think of it in a competitive state, but the big deterrent that everybody talks about is exactly what he was alluding to. The fact that you've thought about the problem, the fact that you are confident, the fact that you seem aware and willing is a huge deterrent, because the majority of the predators, in the criminal sense that we're talking about, are not looking for a challenge. They're not looking for a fight. They're looking for easy prey. And if you don't read as easy prey, then they're just going to go on to the next opportunity. And that's really been my big goal with my clients. My clients, I just want them to be the people that are looked at and said, nah, that looks a little too challenging.
Yeah, I think it's a great point about easy prey. Don't be the mark.
Yeah.
Don't be the mark. Hey, Tim, let me let you run. The books, How to Survive the Most Critical 5 Seconds of Your Life, the most recent, Surviving the Unthinkable. Listen, if there's a time in the future where you can come on, I would love to have you on to talk about one thing in particular, and that is speaking, no more guy conversation, but I would love to have a conversation that I can play for my girlfriend, my mother, my sister, my niece. I would love to have just the women conversation where you can explain to women, because it's one thing being a 6 foot, 190 pound guy or a guy who's in shape, but women don't feel that way. So I would love for you to come on at some point in the future and really just address women.
That would be fantastic. I'd love the opportunity. My last book was that was the focus of the last book. I learned a heck of a lot when I did that, but I thought I knew a lot. But after doing the book, I really have an appreciation for what women face.
Tim, where can we send everybody?
The best place is really targetfocustraining.com. You can get a lot of great free information there. We've got the book available, and any questions that you have. I have a blog there that really just goes in depth. So take advantage of it. Obviously, I would love for people to buy products, buy books, all that other stuff, but I'd much rather have you familiarize yourself with the material and just browse around. I think you'd find a lot of really great, interesting stuff.
Cool stuff. It's amazing in so many walks of life. I think just thinking clearly, even if, for example, in your walk of life, you're having to talk about violence, but violence can be made as logical as trading, as any other thing in this world. And I see so much logic in your book. So fascinating stuff. I appreciate you coming on today.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much for having me.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.